So, picture this. It's late 1889, early 1890. Brazil has just woken up with a huge political hangover. The monarchy, which had been there forever, suddenly vanished. Poof! Dom Pedro II, the old bearded emperor everyone liked, was put on a ship and sent to Europe. In its place, we got this new thing called a republic. It was sold as the future, progress, all that good stuff. But for the common person, especially those living far from big cities like Rio de Janeiro, it was just confusing. Nobody really voted for this. One day you're a subject of an emperor, the next you're a citizen of a republic. What does that even mean? The whole country was in a state of change. It was like your family suddenly changed all the house rules without telling you why. The flag was different. The national anthem was new. People who were important yesterday were nobody today, and vice versa. For many, the empire represented a kind of stability, a known world with its rituals, its nobility, its familiar, fatherly figure of the emperor. The republic, on the other hand, was an abstract idea, messy and often violent, run by military men who seemed more interested in power than people. It was a promise that hadn't been kept yet, and many people felt politically orphaned and adrift. This emptiness was the perfect ground for chaos, hope, and some truly strange stories. Now, let me introduce you to the star of our show. He wasn't a Braganza, he wasn't a noble, he wasn't even remotely connected to the royal family. His name was, by most accounts, simply Silverio. A man of humble beginnings, some say a former soldier, others a simple farmer from the dry lands of northeastern Brazil. He was, by all measures, a nobody. But Silverio had two things going for him, an incredible imagination and the courage of a lion. He saw the confusion, he felt the people's longing for the past, and he must have thought to himself, wait a minute, I can work with this. This wasn't a calculated political plan, it was performance art on a grand scale. He began to build his new identity with the talent of a seasoned actor. He was no longer just Silverio. He was Dom Silverio I, the hidden emperor of Brazil. His backstory was a masterpiece of fiction, a telenovela script waiting to be written. He claimed to be a secret, illegitimate son of Dom Pedro I, or perhaps a lost grandson. The details were always a little vague, which, by the way, is an excellent strategy for any good lie. Okay, so you've got a fake emperor. What's the one thing every emperor needs? A coronation. You can't just say you're the king. You need the ceremony, the pomp, the whole shebang. And Silverio, our man of the hour, understood this perfectly. He knew he needed a spectacle to make his claim real. A moment so grand it would silence the doubters and turn believers into fanatics. In a small, forgotten town in the heart of Brazil, surrounded by cacti and scrubland, they prepared for a royal coronation. It wasn't in the capital. It was a do-it-yourself monarchy, a kind of improv theatre class. There was no gold crown encrusted with diamonds. Instead, a tin crown, maybe brass, decorated with colourful stones and shiny glass bits. A sceptre, a decorated piece of wood. A mantle, a patchwork quilt, maybe a velvet curtain, or a colourful bedspread, sewn to look majestic. The whole village got involved, a community project, a party, a collective act of role-playing, the ceremony in the main square in front of the church. When the story of the Emperor of the Backlands finally hit the big newspapers in Rio de Janeiro and Sao Paulo, the reaction was a glorious mix of disbelief, mockery, and pure amazement. At first, the editors probably thought it was a joke, a tall tale from the countryside. The first headlines dripped with sarcasm, painting the episode as proof of how behind the times the interior was. Tin Crown Emperor, Toy Monarch, they published cartoons showing a silly figure in ridiculous clothes, surrounded by amazed peasants. It was, a perfect story for sophisticated city folks to chuckle at over their morning coffee. But then the story just wouldn't die. More reports kept coming in, not just about the coronation, but about Emperor Silverio holding court, appointing ministers, issuing decrees. He was collecting taxes or donations for the imperial cause and training a small, loyal imperial army. The tone of the press started to shift a little. The ridicule was still there, but now it was mixed with a sense of real wonder and even a bit of alarm. So the million-dollar question is, why? Why on earth would an entire town and then an entire region fall for this? Were they all just dumb? Were they just naive? The answer is much more complicated and much more human than that. First, you have to remember the isolation. We're talking about a time before the internet, before radio, before reliable newspapers in many parts of the country. News was a game of telephone. A story could travel for weeks, changing and growing with each telling. In this environment, a compelling narrative from a charismatic person could easily beat out a distant, impersonal truth from a government no one trusted. Then, there was the powerful element of hope. Life in the Brazilian Sertão was incredibly hard. It was a cycle of drought, poverty and neglect. The Republic, from their perspective, was just a new name for the same old problems. The politicians in Rio didn't care. Then along comes Silverio, a man who not only sees them but tells them they matter. He promises them a return to glory, a special place in his new empire. He's offering them an escape from their harsh reality. Believing him wasn't an act of logic. It was an act of faith, a desperate reach for a beautiful illusion over an ugly truth. Emperor Dom Silverio I's daily life was pure theatre. He was both the director and the main actor. He held daily meetings in the town square, sitting on a makeshift throne, probably a sturdy wooden chair covered with a red cloth. People from miles away came to see him, to ask for blessings, settle arguments, or just to look at their king. He had a talent for looking the part. He listened carefully, nodded seriously, and shared royal wisdom, common sense, Bible sayings, and grand, unclear statements about the great future of the restored empire. His speeches were the main event. He never wrote anything down. It all came from the heart, or so it seemed. He talked about the bad guys in Rio, the godless Republicans who had betrayed the country. They stole the crown from my father's head, but they couldn't steal the empire from the people's hearts. I am here because your hearts called me. Ultimately, the surreal story of Silverio I isn't just a weird historical footnote. It's a deep lesson about the raw power of storytelling. We humans are story-making creatures. We make sense of the world not through facts but through stories. And in times of trouble, the best story wins, no matter if it's true or not. Silverio's story was a huge hit. It had a hero with a secret past, a bad guy government, a promise of hope and a part for everyone to play. It was a story of hope against a reality of sadness. Facts never stood a chance. The symbols he used were super important. A tin crown is, just looking at it, a piece of trash. But as a symbol, it can be stronger than gold. It showed not the wealth of royalty but the will of the people. It was a crown they had made, a king they had picked. The same goes for his makeshift staff and his patchwork cloak. These weren't symbols of power passed down. They were symbols of power made, of a reality forced into being by everyone believing in it. Silverio understood, maybe without even thinking about it, that what matters isn't the object itself, but the story we give it. Nostalgia was the fuel for this whole engine of make-believe. Like all great stories that shine too brightly, this one had to end. The Republican government, initially amused, eventually saw the Sertão Empire as a real threat to its power. You can't have a parallel power structure, no matter how small or theatrical, operating within your borders. Troops were sent. The end was quick, in most accounts not particularly glorious. The imperial army of farmers was no match for the real army. Silverio was captured. His court was broken up. The tin crown was probably thrown in the dust. The dream ended. But it's fascinating to play what if. What if the Republic had been weaker, more fragmented? What if Silverio had been more ambitious, or managed to ally with other unhappy groups, or big landowners, local bosses, unhappy with the new government? It deserves to be remembered not as a joke, because every now and then, when people are scared and confused, a man with a tin crown can seem like a real king, and that's a lesson worth remembering.